guys, my name is Josie, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite part of the brain. So my favorite part of the brain is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a structure located within the limbic system, and it's connected to learning and memory. So the name hippocampus is actually derived from the Greek word for seahorse because, as physicians noted when they first extracted the hippocampus from the brain, it looks kind of like a seahorse when you take it out. The hippocampus is located in the temporal lobe below the cerebral cortex, and it consists of two layers, the hippocampus proper and the dentate gyrus. And if you look here, this little swirly pink thing is actually the hippocampus that we're looking at. So, looking a little bit more, this is a coronal cross-section of hippocampus. And this inner part right here is the dentate gyrus, and this outer spiral here is the hippocampus proper, or that Ammon's horn that I was talking about earlier. So from input to output, the neural circuitry generally enters the dentate gyrus via a pathway known as the perforant pathway, goes to CA3, CA2, then goes to CA1, or it exits into a pathway known as the fornix. Input from the association areas of the cortex enter the dentate gyrus via the parahippocampal and rhinal cortices. And then output from the area generally travels along the fornix, which I was talking about earlier, into a pathway that terminates into the hypothalamus. So, in terms of the individual layers, the hippocampus proper is mainly composed of neurons known as pyramidal neurons, and the dentate gyrus actually has 3 different layers of cells. So these layers of cells are from the outside to the inside, the molecular layer, the intermolecular layer, and the granular layer. Looking at the outputs again, so as I mentioned earlier, a major output goes out via the fornix and goes into the lateral septal area and then eventually into that hypothalamus. And this is important because the hypothalamus controls some hormone secretions, so the hippocampus can therefore be affected by serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine systems. Another very important output projection comes from the medial septal nucleus, which sends cholinergic and GABAergic stimulating fibers to all parts of the hippocampus. And the inputs from the medial septal nucleus play a key role in controlling the physiological state of the hippocampus, and destruction of this nucleus can severely impair certain types of memory. So essentially what all of that is just saying is that the hippocampus, being a very important part of learning and memory, is actually controlled by quite a slew of neurotransmitters. Alright, so looking into the functions of the hippocampus, like every part of the brain, we're still elucidating a lot of the functions that the hippocampus may play a role in, but the 2 main components that the hippocampus plays a role in are learning and memory, at least that we've found so far. So in terms of memory, the hippocampus plays a role in short-term memories, so this includes formation of new memories, as well as long-term episodic memory consolidation. It also coordinates with the amygdala to attach emotions to events and spaces. It also coordinates some motor memory into long-term procedural memory as well. Oops, excuse me. Another interesting thing that I found was more recently, they've noticed that the hippocampus has actually had some relation to memory location, so relative spatial awareness has been associated with learning and memory through the hippocampus. So there have been some hypotheses that the hippocampus may be required to construct a mental image of an environment, or may be necessary for learning and retention of certain spatial memory tasks. So they actually had a study that investigated this hypothesis, and it looked at the brains of cab drivers in London, since they are required to have a relatively expansive, spatial map of the city that they're driving in. So researchers used MRI to compare the size of hippocampi in these London cabbies to the size of hippocampi in control subjects, and they actually found that cab drivers had increased gray matter volume in the hippocampi, which could suggest that the cabbies had formed a larger number of neuronal connections in this area while creating this complex cognitive map. And the last kind of thing that I want to bring up is patient HM. We couldn't really talk about the hippocampus and its role without his personal sacrifice and the contributions that his brain made to science. So 27 years old, patient HM had both hippocampi surgically removed as he had suffered from epileptic seizures for many years previous to that. However, his surgery, though it was experimental, they found that it led to severe anterograde and mild retrograde amnesia since he had both of his hippocampi removed. And through kind of years of studying him before he passed in 2008, as well as the ability to study other patients who had had hippocampal injuries or also experimental surgeries, this really helped propose the role of the hippocampus in learning and memory, and specifically short-term memory, recollection, and episodic memory retention. So patient HM was unfortunately unable to retain any information after his surgery for more than a couple of hours. However, he was still able to retain his personality traits and memories from his childhood, which implicated that the hippocampus could have a significant role in short-term memory and episodic memory formation. And finally, why this is my personal favorite part of the brain. I think the learning memory are a part of everything we do. It contributes to how you learn information in class, how you learn how to walk, run, all sorts of things like that. It's hugely implicated in learning anything from simple everyday tasks to complex subjects. I think it's really interesting that it incorporates components of spatial, explicit, and emotional information to create kind of this complete image of a memory in your mind where you can recall specific details with multiple different sensory organs. And finally, it's actually one of the subjects of my personal lab research. So a little bit of personal bias there, but my lab does work a lot with learning and memory tasks in rats and mice. And we actually developed the Cincinnati water maze, which is pretty cool. And it's a learning and memory test that we can run with certain rodents and animals. And yeah, that is why the hippocampus is my favorite part of the brain. Thank you.